Eleanor Sinclair was a woman of sophistication and immense wealth. She was the widow of Arthur Sinclair, a visionary businessman who built a multi-billion-dollar empire in logistics and transportation. After Arthur's untimely passing 5 years ago, Eleanor had taken over as the company's CEO, much to the surprise of the corporate world. Though she was often underestimated, Eleanor had proven herself to be sharp, intuitive, and fiercely intelligent. But Eleanor carried a secret burden. While she had navigated the business world with grace, her late husband's trusted advisors, men she inherited as part of the company, often undermined her authority. Board meetings were filled with veiled remarks questioning her competence, and she had begun to suspect that some of them were working against her behind the scenes. One evening, Eleanor was walking through the company's sleek glass corridors when she overheard laughter coming from a break room. She paused, curious. Inside, a group of janitors were gathered, sharing stories and jokes during their break. Among them was Jacob Carter, a janitor who had been with the company for over 15 years. Unlike the others, Jacob wasn't laughing. He sat quietly, listening intently, but with a thoughtful expression on his face. Eleanor had always noticed Jacob. He was punctual, meticulous, and unfailingly polite. But there was something else about him, an air of quiet intelligence and wisdom. She decided to strike up a conversation. "Jacob," she said, stepping into the room. The other janitors fell silent, startled by her presence. Jacob stood up immediately, his posture respectful but not subservient. "Mrs. Sinclair," he greeted her with a nod. "I've always wondered," Eleanor began, "what keeps a man like you so grounded? You seem to observe more than you speak." Jacob smiled faintly. "Sometimes you learn more by listening than by talking. Everyone has something to teach if you pay attention." Intrigued, Eleanor invited Jacob to her office the next day. As they spoke, she discovered he had a degree in business administration, but had never pursued a corporate career due to personal setbacks and financial struggles. He had taken the janitorial job to support his family and never found his way back to the corporate ladder. Despite this, Jacob had a sharp mind and a deep understanding of human nature. Eleanor had an idea, one that bordered on absurdity, but excited her nonetheless. "Jacob," she said, "I want you to accompany me to the next board meeting." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I follow." "These board members think they're untouchable. They look at people like you and me as if we don't belong. I want you there to shake things up." Jacob hesitated. "With all due respect, Mrs. Sinclair, I'm just a janitor." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with determination. "Not to me, you're not." The day of the board meeting arrived. Eleanor walked into the opulent conference room with Jacob by her side. The board members, dressed in expensive suits, exchanged puzzled and disdainful glances. Whispers buzzed around the room. "Who's this?" one of them finally asked, his tone laced with condescension. "This," Eleanor said, her voice steady, "is Jacob Carter. He'll be joining us today." The room fell silent. Eleanor took her seat at the head of the table, and Jacob stood behind her, his hands clasped neatly in front of him. As the meeting progressed, the board members continued their usual tactics of interrupting Eleanor and undermining her suggestions. But every time they did, Jacob would lean down and whisper something in her ear. "What if we approach it this way instead?" he suggested at one point, offering a strategic solution to a logistics problem that had stumped the board for weeks. Eleanor repeated his suggestion aloud, and the room fell quiet. Even the most skeptical board members had to admit it was a brilliant idea. As the meeting went on, Jacob's insights continued to steer the conversation in unexpected and productive directions. By the end of the session, the board members were left with no choice but to acknowledge Eleanor's competence, and, by extension, Jacob's. After the meeting, one of the senior board members approached Eleanor. "That man," he said, nodding toward Jacob. "Where did you find him?" Eleanor smiled. "In the break room." The board member frowned, confused. "He's not a consultant?" "No," Eleanor said, her smile widening. "He's our janitor." The board member's face turned a shade of red. "You mean to tell me—" "Yes," Eleanor interrupted, "and perhaps it's time we all start valuing people not for their titles, but for their contributions." Word of the meeting spread quickly through the company. Jacob became an unlikely hero, and his story inspired employees at all levels. Eleanor decided to promote Jacob to a newly created role as her personal advisor, a move that sent shockwaves through the corporate world. But the story didn't end there. With Jacob's help, Eleanor began to uncover the extent of the corruption within her board. Several members had been embezzling funds and sabotaging company projects for personal gain. Jacob's keen observations and ability to connect with people proved invaluable in exposing their schemes. Eleanor took decisive action, firing the corrupt board members and replacing them with individuals who shared her vision for the company. Under her leadership, and with Jacob by her side, the company entered a new era of growth and innovation. Years later, at a company gala, Eleanor stood on stage to deliver a speech. Jacob was in the audience, now a respected figure in the corporate world. Success, Eleanor said, isn't about where you come from or what title you hold. It's about integrity, hard work, and the courage to see potential in places others overlook. Jacob Carter taught me that, and for that I will be forever grateful. The crowd erupted into applause, but Jacob simply nodded, a small smile on his face. He had never sought recognition, but he had found something far more valuable: purpose, respect, and the chance to make a difference. This story highlights the power of seeing beyond stereotypes and embracing the potential in everyone, regardless of their background or role.